the final panel of the day is on building the towns of tomorrow. What will the towns of tomorrow look like given the new towns code? What have we learned from the past, and where do we even start? So to help me answer these questions, I'm very pleased to welcome Eleanor Young, Director of the Blackstock Partnership, which is a micro consultancy specialising in strategic advice to councils, developers, regional and central government bodies on all aspects of development and regeneration. Nick Tune, CEO of Optimise AI, which he co-founded as a spin-out from Cardiff University in 2023. Last year, 2024, Optimise AI won the Wales Tech Startup of the Year. Congratulations. And has clients such as Network Rail, the University of Wales, Luton Airport, and many others. Nick is also a commissioner for the National Infrastructure Commission for Wales. And last but not least, Willem-Frederick Metzelaar, Head of Innovation Hub West at EIT Urban Mobility. EIT is a body of the European Union and Europe's largest network for transport innovation in cities. So welcome to the panel. Very glad to have you here. And just a nice, easy question to start the conversation. This is to you all. With the UK aiming to build 1.5 million homes over the next 5 years, as well as a new towns code prioritising well-designed, high-quality and environmentally sustainable communities, what is one priority that governments and business need to be focusing on? So, Eleanor, you're looking awed by the question, so I'm going to start with Willem-Frederick.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, well, for me, sustainability is priority number one. So human-centered and sustainable housing, I think, is best. Affordable, of course, but those are the elements I think that are critical.
Okay, sustainability and human-centered and affordable housing. I think it's maybe more than one thing, but I'm happy to accept that answer. So, Nick.
Well, maybe I'll be a little bit controversial and say land banking. At the moment, there's, I don't know how many, 6 companies who land bank nearly everything and then sit on it. Now, if we're going to deliver what we actually need to deliver within the timescale, we're going to have to break that model.
Yeah, great.
How are we going to do? Are we going to nationalise the land? Is that how are we going to do that?
Oh, I don't know what the answer is. I'll just tell you what the problem is. Let's work it out.
Maybe we can get into that.
Let's figure that one out. I mean, with housing development, there is never one priority. There are so many different balancing factors that you have to take, and I don't disagree with anything that colleagues have said. But I think if I had to summarise it in one word now for you, which I've been asked to do, I would say capacity. So that's about capacity of the industry to deliver. It could be about capacity of local authorities to manage the process. It could be about getting the right spatial frameworks in place, and I think when we've heard it said here today quite loudly and clearly, infrastructure, power is a really crucial thing, sewage and water, and those things are holding back development across the country. So I would say capacity, to summarise it in a word.
Yeah, okay, and I think that links to my next question, which is for you, Eleanor, actually.
Oh, okay.
So you may want to expand on some of those things. What are the placemaking and design principles that we need to be designing in now, and how do we do that in a way that strikes the right balance between top-down planning and community-driven development?
Okay, well, I mean, it depends on the place, because it depends whether you've got existing communities in a place or whether you are actually literally talking about a new town. I would have thought that anyone with any sense would not be going for a load of new, completely, towns from scratch at this stage in the game. I'm not saying there's no place for them in the kind of in the future, but I think there's lots of existing communities and settlements, and they might be the size of London, they might be the size of a small town, which can actually grow and accommodate new communities within them. And I mean, I grew up in a new town, and I'm thinking about that particular place, which is nearly 80 years old, which can accommodate effectively another new town again, and needs to, in order to thrive into the future, but doesn't have the kind of strategic level governance there in place to drive that change. I think you can't do change to communities. If communities exist, you have to work with them. And even where you've got a place which is quite sparsely populated, you need to be talking and bringing people along. Well, what do you need? But in a lot of cases where you're going to do large-scale development, there is going to be large-scale change. There is going to be massive disruption. There's going to be, it's miserable if your next door neighbour gets their roof conversion done. You know, you get dust all over your house for 3 months or whatever. And so imagine living next door to a building site of a kind of scale of a new community. So you're going to have to be talking to people. People are going to have to, probably some of them are going to want to move away, and that's got to be facilitated. But what they want and what they aspire to, whether that's open space, whether that's a new school, that's got to be delivered on. So you've got to be talking to your community at the beginning of the process, during the process, after the process is finished. You've got to really build those community links there in order to do it. And I would have thought that even if you draw a line on a map where there's no real town, you're always going to find people there somewhere. But I wouldn't advocate doing that. I'd advocate working in the grain of existing communities.
Great, thank you. Which leads me on to Nick. Could you talk a bit about what you see as being the game-changing technologies that can support new town developments? And then maybe building on that, how do the public and private sector need to think about these technologies as an opportunity for SMEs and innovators?
I think the onset or the use of artificial intelligence opens up so many possibilities that we never had before, even in related area that we work in terms of energy minimization. Just by using the data that's currently available, such as a smart meter, you can do so much to understand the consumption and how to improve the energy performance of those buildings, but also then looking across at a whole grid level. And then from that, you can also utilize information to understand, if you like, the air quality, the health, the potential for overheating, and so many of those things. So I think there's a massive opportunity to make a lot of the publicly available and privately available data sets out there, and to be able then to allow SMEs, answering almost the second question, the ability to be able to develop new opportunities and new insight. You know, I really like how Transport for London years ago opened up so much of their data sets, and there's some amazing innovations that came from that led to a load of sustainability, a load of great innovation, a load of new companies. So, you know, if we can get developers, we can get local councils to open up some of those, I think what you'll do is you'll find innovations and improvements across the whole spectrum, not just, if you like, in energy management, but it could be in the planning spectrum, it could be in the design spectrum, it could be a whole range of things that we just don't even know about. Now, I appreciate there's a whole thing on security, but we need to be bold enough, because I think the problem I see at the moment is we worry all about security all the time, but we're giving all our data to Elon Musk and to Netflix and to, you know, so we're worrying about it, but we're just still giving it to everybody anyway. So we need to use it for the public good.
Just building on that, do you think there is a capacity or a skills barrier to that?
No, I don't, actually. I think Britain is really great at innovating if it's given the chance to innovate. I think often we don't open things up, and the house market is exactly the perfect case in that point, where we make the barrier to entry so high that you really totally stifle innovation. So I'm not worried about that at all. I think if there's an opportunity, people will fill that hole.
Great, thank you. So Willem, I have a question I'm sure you've been asked many times. New town developments can too easily become overly car dependent. How do we avoid this by supporting active and accessible travel that promotes health? And what can the UK learn from our friends across Europe?
Interesting question, thanks. I think, Ellen, you said it, just said it. It's, I think the redevelopment of existing cities and areas is key. So these remote cities that we have developed in the 70s, 80s and 90s, where you were totally car dependent, are basically a nightmare. At the time, of course, they were seen as the future and key in our wealth, etc., etc. Now we understand it's optimizing current infrastructure that we already have for hundreds of years next door here, actually. So and I think that you need, as you said, the technologies that we currently have. So digitalization is key in all this, to redesign existing places and optimizing them. And there's no space for cars actually in those areas. So cars are great. I'm not against cars, but not everywhere. So I think we need to take elements of our current society and then optimize them, and maybe reduce some of these elements. So optimize mass transportation on rail, and maybe downsize a bit on private car ownership, and start walking and cycling. And that's, I think, is the massive transition that cities need. And then what you do with rural areas is another topic, I think. But also in those areas you see car dependence is really, really high, and you don't always need a car there as well. So I think we have to rethink our public transport in those areas. How? I don't know. But
I mean, we do have some of the technology, don't we, to do that. So, for example, we have technology in cities where you have like a bus app that tells you when the bus is coming. You've got apps that can tell you where the parking spaces are when you're looking for a parking space. You've got car clubs which are run off apps. You've got, you know, walking and cycling routes. So Transport for London, for example, will tell me how to cycle to anywhere I want to go to. And you could easily transfer those models into towns as a starting point. It is more challenging, obviously, in rural areas, because you wouldn't, like things like car clubs wouldn't work. They might work in a town or sort of smaller city, and cycle hire schemes is another one. Yeah. But they wouldn't work in rural areas. But even in rural areas, like a proper thing that tells you when the bus is coming would be amazing, because you stand in the Lake District at some bus stop thinking, well, is the bus going to come? And then, like a miracle, the bus emerges. But you've got no, like, you don't feel you can rely on it, especially if you know. And I think that we could be utilising a lot of the existing technologies better across the country. And I think, the car dependency in most towns in the UK is pretty, it's just unacceptable. You're sitting in a traffic jam for nothing, because you can't rely on the bus.
Yeah. Well, you see, so Europe is big, evidently, and so in some cities you see these advanced systems. They're called MAS. Everybody knows it. We've been talking about it for 30 years now, but now we're actually seeing the results, positive results of that. So we're able now, not 30 years ago, but now we're able to integrate all that data. And as you said, a US dependency on data, that's another thing. But we're now able to combine all that data. So me as a traveler can decide whether I go by foot, bicycle, train, tram, whatever, and return home safely, which is another critical element, I think, of the car system flaw. That I can come home and my kids come home safely, using all those elements. And navigating, which is quite difficult if you don't have an overview of where the bus is coming at the right time, at the right place. Yeah.
So perhaps sort of following on from that, should new towns be deregulated, or maybe even regulated, to enable more technology experimentation? And what are some of the trade-offs that we need to be thinking about? I don't know if anyone wants to come in on.
Well, EITO mobility, we depend on living labs. So cities as living labs. And more cities are actually open to experimenting with new technologies. They also favor proven technologies, so new and proven technologies, and not so much really experimental technologies. But and they are willing to deregulate They are willing to open up the systems that they have. Also, data dependency. You see, well, what you see is that some departments within cities, they think they are the owner of their data. And so opening up their data is also part of that process.
Yeah, it's just as Nick mentioned earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, I quite like you say deregulation. I think, when we think of what our favourite towns and cities are, and the parts of those towns and cities, they're definitely not the big housing development that was built on the edge of the city in the 1990s or the 1990s, right? So that is absolutely not what we want. So how do we go about changing and breaking that model? And that part of that, you need to be a bit innovative, and those cities and those towns grew up quite higgledy-piggledy. So how can you make sure you have the right quality whilst allowing innovation, is what I'm trying to say. And that is innovation around land, that's innovation around construction, that's innovation around occupation, that's innovation around travel. And I think it's trying to deal with those two things, because I understand it's easier to try to legislate the whole thing, but then you end up with that big homogenous growth that we had. So we need to somehow have the barriers that we could, certain barriers within them, but at the same time allowing innovation to flourish. And as I say, I think that it's not so much actually a technology problem. No. I think the technology again can fill it, and we can do these clever things. I think it's enabling people. And I don't, what I mean by people, I mean us, but also the different types of developers, different types of, integrators into that mechanism.
I mean, I don't know if that... I think people know how to do good development well, and I think there's lots of examples, both in the UK and European examples, of integrated, high-density, sustainable, well-designed development around, and concepts like 20-minute or 15-minute neighbourhood. They're pretty established. People know you really need services in walking distance. I think the challenge for us is how to regulate for those outcomes in a way that doesn't sort of prevent, small-scale builders doing it, or, and I think the point you made about the some of the big land bankers and the big developers, well, they're the only ones who are in the market because they're the only ones who can afford to put the roads in and put the infrastructure in. But actually, if we had a more mixed economy approach where maybe the public sector led a bit more on the enabling, and then there was a bit more space for innovators, to deliver. But I think we know what the qualities are. We know, we've had space standards, we've had inclusive design, we've had lifetime homes, we've had, sort of all of that established policy in London for nearly 25 years, but it hasn't been present throughout the UK. Why? We know how to do this stuff well. Let's just get on with it, But I think we will have to regulate a bit for that. And so I do worry about the idea that, if we lift planning regs, all these homes are going to be built. Well, they might, but I think we're just going to see more of what we've had.
Yeah,
because the market knows it can soak that up, and that's what the market...
I guess, and that's the problem. Are they going to end up delivering what is the most cost-effective or the most profitable? Yeah. And that's not necessarily what is the best for what we, society, need. Yeah.
Right. I think we could go on for a long time on this topic.
I could talk for a long time.
I'm going to give you my final question before looking to the room. This is to any or all of you. How do you see new towns contributing to regional economic growth? And what measures do we need to put in place to ensure long-term economic benefits for these new communities? Anyone like to take that?
Very simple answer. You need to allocate enough space for jobs and industry to come, as you do for homes, because you don't want to create dormitories. And there's a lot of arcs in the UK, and there's a lot of corridors, and there's a lot of hinterlands around cities, and the connectivity between universities, tech, manufacturing. People know what they need, and there's not enough land to deliver what, say, for example, the universities need. So I think there's a lot of intelligent stuff you could do to create better outcomes in new towns. They shouldn't just be relied on local services. They should be actually hosting proper industries as well.
I guess that's kind of what I'm a big fan of, the whole idea of not so much 15-minute cities, but 15-minute communities. As in, the community has everything you need within that community. You know, COVID did change everything, but I can just think of where I live. I live in a place called Mumbles, which is just outside Swansea.
Nice.
But it's got everything you need, right? It's got the doctors, it's got the shops, it's got the beach, it's got everything, right? So you can get around that easily, you know, and you don't need to live miles out and drive out. Do you know what I'm saying? So how do we create more of those types of places? And I think that then is a driver for economic prosperity, but also places, personal, healthy prosperity, places that people want to live in.
100%.
Willem?
Well, transport is key.
Yes.
So small villages, perfect, but make sure that people can cheaply move to a big city for work or for education or for social activities, and back, and within the city in the most sustainable way. Move in the most sustainable way. That's, I think, is key.
Great, thank you. I don't have a timer, but I think I have
There
a
is
couple
3
of minutes.
minutes.
Oh, the timer's hidden behind the
3
water.
minutes we got, I'll tell you.
So we have 3 minutes for questions. I haven't been given a Slido either, so
No one's put
I'm just
anything
gonna
on the Slido.
I'm just going to look out to the audience. Thank you very much. Please say your name and where you're from before your question.
Stephen Widnall from GCRE Limited. Does the panel think that moving to a rental model for housing could be part of the solutions for the issues you've been talking about, rather than the traditional ownership model? And if you think it is, how do you wean off the current population from the idea that ownership of their house is, a good goal?
I think that's a really hard one to change. I know parts of Europe's a big place. It's very different, but Britain, you know, home is your castle type thing. How do you break that? Because it is seen as a financial mechanism as well. So it's, you know, passing that on to your family. I don't know if I would even try to break the model of ownership. And also, interesting, I was it's northern Italy only last week, and there, you know, lots more people live in flats. And I actually think that helps in that community area as well, where we all want our own housing. So my view is not trying to force a change on people. It's how can we live within the existing framework people are used to, but doing it in the most effective
No, I completely disagree with you on that. I think there's a massive place for rented housing, particularly around institutional investors. So in terms of unlocking supply and stimulating buildings to be built, if you have to build a scheme and you've got to sell it all to individuals, you have to phase it so slowly. With rented housing, you can put it out there and you can get it all funded up front. And then that's a good model for institutional returns. So I don't think it's the answer, but I think it is an answer, and I think it's important. And the other thing is, I think we do have to have a national conversation about home ownership and we've got into this awful situation where it's all tied up with finance and inheritance and intergenerational inequality. And we've got this ludicrous situation. We had a conversation earlier today about housing for older people, where I completely agreed with everything that was being said about having homes suitable for people's lifetimes, having homes that people don't have to move out of if they become injured. Well, the best types of homes are flatted accommodation which are fully accessible and have big enough bathrooms and all the rest of it. But really, what we don't want to see, and we've got in this country, is old people living in 3-4 bedroom homes at their family homes and they never move. If I haven't moved in a 2-bedroom flat by the day of my 70th birthday, then that's my birthday present to myself. Well, we've got to change the conversation completely in this country. It's so dysfunctional. Sorry, Willem.
No problem. Well, I had to say a lot about it because the Netherlands, they have 1/3 of the housing is rental houses. And but I could talk for hours about it. But it has its benefits, yes.
I was going to say, I was hoping for a really spiky question for the end, and I think we got probably the spikiest question there is. So thank you very much. Thanks everyone for your attention, and thanks to the panelists.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.